We decided you didn't need to be there, Dad said over the phone. His voice casual like he was discussing weekend plans. The will reading for my grandfather's estate was happening in 2 hours, and apparently I wasn't invited. But here's what they didn't know. I was the only person who could make any of it happen. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing documents in my home office. I'd been expecting to hear about the will reading, but not like this. It's just for important family members, Dad continued. You understand, right? No point cluttering up the lawyer's office with everyone. I sat frozen at my desk, phone pressed to my ear. Important family members. I was Grandpa William's only granddaughter, the one who'd spent every Sunday afternoon with him for the last 5 years. The one who'd driven him to doctor appointments, managed his medications, and held his hand in the hospital during his final weeks. Your Aunt Margaret will be there, Dad was saying. And your Uncle Richard, of course. Your cousins Brandon and Ashley. We'll fill you in on the details afterward. Who decided this? I asked quietly. We all discussed it at Margaret's house last week. It just makes sense, Elena. The estate is complicated, and you've always been more about feelings than business. More about feelings than business. That's what they thought of me. Elena, the social worker who made $52,000 a year. Elena, who drove a 7-year-old Honda. Elena, who rented a modest apartment in a decent neighborhood. Elena, who clearly couldn't understand complex financial matters. Does the attorney know I'm not coming? I asked. I'll let Harold know. He'll understand. After Dad hung up, I sat staring at my computer screen. Open in front of me was the estate file I'd been organizing for the past 6 months. The file that contained every asset, every account, every piece of property in Grandpa William's considerable portfolio. The file that only I had complete access to because Grandpa had appointed me as executor of his estate 2 years ago. Nobody in the family knew. Grandpa had insisted on keeping it quiet. They'll make assumptions, he'd told me in his study, his weathered hand signing the documents. They'll think I'm playing favorites, or that you manipulated me. Let them find out when it matters. Why me? I'd asked him. Why not Dad or Aunt Margaret? He'd looked at me with those sharp blue eyes that age had never dimmed. Because you're the only one who visits me, because you want to, not because you want something. Because you understand that wealth is responsibility, not entitlement, and because when I'm gone, someone needs to make sure this family doesn't tear itself apart over money. Now, 6 months after his death, here we were. I called Harold Pemberton, the estate attorney. He answered on the second ring. Elena, I was just about to call you. Your father left me a message saying you won't be attending this afternoon. Is everything all right? I wasn't invited, Harold. They decided I didn't need to be there. Silence on the other end. Then, they decided. I see. What did my father tell you? That you had a scheduling conflict and that we should proceed without you. Harold's voice was carefully neutral. Elena, you understand I cannot proceed without the executor present. The reading itself is ceremonial, but nothing can be distributed, no accounts can be accessed, and no decisions can be made without your signature. I know. Would you like me to inform your family of this before they arrive? I thought about Dad's casual dismissal, about being labeled unimportant, about 5 years of Sunday afternoons that apparently meant nothing. No, I said, let them come, I'll be there. Are you certain? Absolutely certain. I arrived at Pemberton and Associates at exactly 2 p.m. The law office was in a restored Victorian downtown, all dark wood and leather furniture. The receptionist smiled when she saw me. Miss Elena, Mr. Pemberton said to send you right back to the conference room. The conference room doors were heavy oak. Through the frosted glass I could see shapes moving around. I heard my Aunt Margaret's voice, sharp and commanding as always. I pushed open the doors. The room went silent. 6 pairs of eyes turned to stare at me. Dad sat at the head of the long table, looking startled. Aunt Margaret was to his right, her Botoxed forehead managing to convey disapproval despite its limited mobility. Uncle Richard slouched in his chair, checking his phone. My cousins Brandon and Ashley sat together, both wearing black like they were attending a funeral instead of a financial windfall distribution. Harold Pemberton stood at the front of the room near a projection screen, his expression professionally blank. Elena, Dad said, recovering. What are you doing here? I was invited. I walked to the empty chair at the opposite end of the table from Dad. The power position, Grandpa had called it, by the estate attorney, 6 months ago. There's been a misunderstanding, Aunt Margaret said crisply. She was wearing a Chanel suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. This meeting is for direct heirs and decision makers. I agree, I said, sitting down. That's why I'm here. Harold cleared his throat. Perhaps we should begin. Everyone is now present. Harold, I told you Elena had a conflict, Dad said, irritation creeping into his voice. I'm afraid there was a miscommunication, Thomas. Elena doesn't have a conflict. She is in fact essential to these proceedings. Uncle Richard finally looked up from his phone. Why? What's she got to do with any of this? Harold walked to his briefcase and removed a document. Because Elena Morgan is the executor of William Morgan's estate. She has been for 2 years. Without her presence and signature, nothing in this will can be executed. The silence was absolute. I watched the information process across their faces. Confusion first, then disbelief, then something that looked like panic on Dad's face. That's impossible, Aunt Margaret said. Dad would have told us. William Morgan was under no obligation to inform anyone of his choice of executor, Harold said. He made his decision and had it properly documented and filed. She's 29 years old, Dad said, standing up. She's a social worker. She doesn't know anything about estate management. Elena has a master's degree in nonprofit administration with a focus on financial management, Harold replied. She's been managing the accounting for 3 charitable organizations. William found her eminently qualified. That was news to them too. They'd never asked about my graduate degree, earned online while working full-time. They'd never asked about the nonprofit board positions or the financial certifications. This is a joke, Brandon said. He was 34, worked in his father's car dealership, and had been telling everyone for months about the classic Corvette he was going to buy with his inheritance. Grandpa wouldn't give control to her. Grandpa gave control to the person he trusted, I said quietly. Aunt Margaret's eyes narrowed. How much did you manipulate him? An old man, sick, probably not thinking clearly. That's enough, Harold interrupted sharply. William Morgan was of sound mind when he appointed Elena. I witnessed it myself, as did 2 independent witnesses. Any contest to his mental capacity will fail, and I'll testify to that personally. Let's just see what the will says, Uncle Richard said. Read it, and then we can figure out how to fix this executor situation. Harold looked at me. I nodded. Very well. The last will and testament of William Henry Morgan, executed on March 15th, 2 years ago. Harold began reading. The preliminaries were standard. Grandpa's full name, his statement of sound mind, the revocation of all previous wills. Then came the specific bequests. To my son Thomas, I leave my collection of fishing equipment and my Ford truck. Dad's face went red. Fishing equipment. His father had an estate worth millions, and he was getting fishing rods. To my daughter Margaret, I leave my late wife's jewelry collection and my shares in Morgan Family Wholesale. Aunt Margaret's expression was calculating. The wholesale business had been in decline for years, barely profitable. To my son Richard, I leave my golf clubs and my boat. Uncle Richard laughed, but it was hollow. Golf clubs. Jesus. Harold continued through the cousins. Brandon got Grandpa's old Chevrolet collection. 3 cars in various states of disrepair, all needing expensive restoration. Ashley got Grandpa's library and his antique furniture. The remainder of my estate, Harold read, including all financial accounts, investment portfolios, real estate holdings and business interests not specifically bequeathed above, I leave in trust. This trust will be managed by my executor, Elena Morgan, for the benefit of charitable organizations she deems worthy. The room erupted. That's not legal. Aunt Margaret was on her feet. He can't do that. Dad's voice rose. We're his children. How much? Uncle Richard demanded. How much is in the remainder? Harold waited for the noise to die down. The estate has been appraised at approximately $8.7 million. The specific bequests total approximately $400,000 in value. The remainder $8.3 million goes to the charitable trust. You could have heard a pin drop. Elena gets $8 million. Ashley's voice was small, shocked. Elena gets nothing, Harold clarified. She manages the trust. She receives a standard executor's fee, 3% of the estate value, approximately $260,000. But the principal goes entirely to charity. Deserve, I said softly. Everyone turned to look at me. When was the last time any of you visited Grandpa when you didn't want something? That's not fair, Dad said. No, Dad. You visited him 6 times in the last 5 years. I counted. Twice you asked him to co-sign loans. Once you wanted him to invest in your business. 3 times were holidays when you stayed for an hour. I turned to Aunt Margaret. You called him every month to complain about your expenses. You asked him to pay for Ashley's wedding, Brandon's business startup, and your kitchen renovation. He was family, Margaret said coldly. Family helps family. I drove him to 47 doctor appointments in the last 2 years. I continued. I organized his medications. I had dinner with him every Sunday. I listened to his stories. I played chess with him even though he always won. I was there in the hospital every single day for 3 weeks before he died. You were manipulating him, Brandon shouted. I was loving him, I said. There's a difference. Uncle Richard leaned back in his chair. So what now? You're just going to give away millions to charity, while we get nothing. You're not getting nothing, I said. You're getting exactly what Grandpa wanted you to have. The things he valued that held meaning. Dad, he loved fishing with you when you were young. Those rods were from every trip you ever took together before you got too busy. Aunt Margaret, that jewelry was Grandma's. Every piece has a story. Uncle Richard,
That boat was where Grandpa said he felt most at peace. Don't try to make this sentimental, Margaret snapped. This is about money. He had $8 million and gave it away to spite us. He gave it away because he spent his whole life building that wealth through hard work. I said, he grew up poor. He built his business from nothing. And he watched his children and grandchildren treat money like it was owed to them. I pulled out a letter from my bag. Grandpa's handwriting, shaky but clear. He left me this to read if there were questions. Do you want to hear it? Yes, Dad said, his voice hollow. I unfolded the paper and began to read. To my family, if you're hearing this letter, it means you're confused or angry about my will. Maybe both. I want you to understand why I made these choices. I loved each of you. I loved you as children, and I loved who I hoped you would become. But somewhere along the way, money became more important to you than people. You saw me as a bank, not as your father or grandfather. Elena was the only one who saw me as a person. She visited because she wanted to know me, not because she wanted something from me. She listened to my stories even though she'd heard them before. She laughed at my jokes. She held my hand when I was scared. The specific items I left you aren't worthless. They're memories. They're chances to remember who we were before. Wealth complicated everything. The fishing rods, the jewelry, the boat, the cars. These are pieces of our family history. The money goes to charity because I want it to help people who need it. People like I used to be before I built my business. Elena will make sure it does good in this world. If you're angry, be angry at me, not at Elena. She didn't ask for this responsibility. I gave it to her because I trust her to do what's right. I hope someday you understand. With love, Dad and Grandpa William. I folded the letter. Aunt Margaret was crying, actual tears running down her face. Dad was staring at the table. Uncle Richard had his head in his hands. Ashley spoke quietly. I didn't know he felt that way. None of us did, I said, because we didn't ask. We didn't listen. Harold began organizing his papers. The estate will be settled according to William's wishes. Elena will work with our office to establish the charitable trust. The specific bequest will be distributed within 30 days. Are there any legal questions? Silence. Then we're concluded. Elena, I'll need you to stay for some signatures. The family filed out slowly. Dad paused at the door, looking back at me. Your grandfather's Sunday pot roast dinners, he said. I remember those. He'd spend all day cooking. He still made pot roast every Sunday. I said, right until the end. There was always enough for two. Dad nodded, something breaking in his expression. I should have been there. Yeah, I said simply. You should have. After they left, Harold and I spent an hour on paperwork. Signatures, initial trust documents, transfer authorizations. That was difficult, Harold said as we finished. It was necessary. William chose well. You'll honor his wishes. I drove home as the sun was setting. My phone had 17 missed calls and dozens of text messages. Some angry, some apologetic, all wanting something. I didn't answer any of them. Not yet. Instead, I went home, fed my cat, and opened my laptop. I pulled up the list Grandpa and I had made together during one of our Sunday dinners. Organizations that helped people experiencing homelessness, scholarship funds for first-generation college students, medical debt relief charities, food banks, youth programs, places where $8.3 million could change lives. You did good, Grandpa, I said to the empty room. My phone buzzed. A text from Dad. Can we talk? Really talk? I looked at it for a long moment, then typed back. Sunday dinner. My place. 5 p.m. Bring the fishing rods. I want to hear the stories about every trip you took. His response came quickly. I'll be there. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was a start. And sometimes, that's all you can ask for. The executor's fee would let me buy a modest house. The trust would help thousands of people. And maybe, just maybe, my family would learn that wealth measured in dollars was nothing compared to wealth measured in presence. Grandpa William had known that all along. Now it was my job to make sure his final lesson wasn't wasted.